All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Alexa Carey, and I'm the Partner Relations Coordinator at Care Compass Network for both the West and the South RPUs. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn, titled The Space Between Empathy and Boundaries, Where Enough is Enough. I'm sure you all have already noticed, but before I get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. Today, we are not using the Zoom WebEx platform. We are just using Zoom meetings, which is why you can see other attendees. With that being said, we do encourage you to turn your videos on. If your video is lagging, we recommend that you try turning your video off, and that should address any video quality problems. It is also recommended that you close out of any other programs that you're not using, any VPNs or other networks to help with connectivity. Please keep yourself on mute to ensure that everyone can hear the speaker and eliminate any background noise. Questions can be entered in the chat box throughout the duration of the presentation. There will be a brief question and answer period post-meeting, and at that time, we will take any additional questions. Please use the raise your hand feature and we will call on you individually. The raise your hand feature is under reactions located at the bottom of your screen. And lastly, the Lunch and Learn is being recorded for quality assurance purposes and may be uploaded to the CCN website and YouTube page. I would now like to pass it over to Georgia Entwistle, who is CCN's Workforce Development Manager, and she will be introducing our presenter. Georgia?
Thank you, Alexa. Our presenter today, Kathryn Simons, is a licensed clinical social worker at Greater Binghamton Health Center. She has over 15 years of social work experience in child protection services, case management as a CPEP evaluator, as well as a pre-release coordinator for seriously mentally ill inmates at the Elmira Correctional Facility. In her current role, Kathryn has dedicated her time to working with and supporting teenagers and families in our local communities. A passion of Kathryn's is educating and conducting professional development programs at schools on the impact of childhood trauma and adversity, such as social behaviors, academics, behavioral health, and overall well-being. She is a supporter of building positive, healthy relationships and mentorships, which help children, families, and individuals to build resilience and heal from adversity. Kathryn encourages the practice of self-care and professional boundaries for all individuals, parents, and professionals. A strong trauma-informed community begins with caregivers and professionals learning to care for themselves and each other when faced with challenging work. Kathryn is part of a 24-member Care Compass Network regional trauma-informed care network tasked with increasing the awareness of adverse childhood experiences, traumas, toxic stress, and their impact on children, families, workforce, and the community. So take it away for us, Kathryn.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here with you today. So I want to start by saying that the reason why I do this particular presentation is because of the really difficult experiences I've had professionally. When you work in any field where you have face-to-face interactions with people who are struggling for whatever reason, whether you're collecting bills at NYSEG or a child protective worker or a social worker or someone who sits at a front desk in an office, it can be really overwhelming and difficult to manage your emotions when people are emotional in front of you. And it's not always that you have places where you work that are supportive and understanding of that. And so I kind of came to a place where I knew I had to make some changes in how I was approaching my job and how I saw myself in my role in order to keep going. And it was like it was a big eye opener because most of the time for the past 5 years, I've been talking predominantly about trauma. So going to schools and communities and talking about the impact of trauma, but not like maybe glossing over the idea that it's also really difficult for people who have had trauma in their lives doing this work or hearing about other people's trauma and not having an outlet or an understanding. So with that said, this is a personal, this is sort of, a personal expose, I don't know, like a journey into what has worked for me. I've tried every single thing I'm going to talk about, and they've all been pretty successful for helping me get back on track. And I wouldn't say that I'm like, I'd say like I'm in long-term recovery from burnout. So hopefully that, you know, I'm not preaching to you. I'm coming as someone who is had their own difficulties with this. So the space between empathy and boundaries is a place where enough is enough. And that's not to speak like, you know, that you've reached your limit and that like, you know, you're not going to take anything more, but it's like literally like what you're doing is enough. And the idea that you have to be doing more, or the idea that, you know, like it feels like it's not enough, it is enough. Like if you're coming and you're putting your best foot forward every day and doing what you know is within your responsibilities, then it's enough. So today we're going to define what healthy boundaries are and different examples of empathy. Describe warning signs and negative outcomes when boundaries and empathy go unchecked. Plan for using boundaries and intellect to balance empathy, and use skills to manage emotions in the moment. So secondary traumatic stress really happens when you're seeing something happen in front of you repeatedly, a one-time thing, or just, you know, something in the community, something in your own life, where you're watching something happen that is out of your control and out of the person's control. And it may just be that someone is out of control. What is that interaction like for you? So are you able to help in that moment? Are you being yelled at? Are you part of a support system? It depends on sort of what your role is in that observation, and then how you react to it. And so do you have a healthy reaction to it? Do you understand, you know, this has nothing to do with you. This isn't about you. It's about what's going on with the person in front of you or whatever the situation is. Or do you personalize it, feel like you have to fix it, and feel like it like becomes part of who you are? And so those are like, you know, the difficulties in what we have is that we think like, well, this is part of our jobs, it's part of life. Like you have to, like, this isn't something you can avoid, but it is something you can look at differently and try to just try to not let it become a part of the background noise and more about like recognizing the impact. So I'm going to give an example. I worked in a prison for 4 years, and, you know, every day you saw something that maybe was a little alarming, something that, you know, you're not going to see in a normal job, or like whatever a normal job is. But, you know, I would walk through center gate and watch, you know, like somebody get hurt in part of like a, you know, whatever reason it is, where an inmate hurts another inmate. And I would just keep walking to my office and never really processed it. You know, those were the interactions that I would have afterwards, or observation. Like, you know, there was no processing. There was no any like, oh my God, that was messed up. It was just like supposed to be like this is where you work and this is what happens. And my reaction at the time, you know, I knew my heart was racing. I knew I was kind of like, what the fun did I get myself into? But you just push ahead and you keep doing it. And after a while, you keep doing that over and over again. And it just becomes something that you don't even realize has affected your life in a way that is, it's, you know, difficult to come back from if you're not aware of it in the moment. So stress is defined in the article, The Hidden Cost of Empathy. Mentally and emotionally disruptive or disquieting influence which can arise from positive or negative events. Stress emerges over time. Each new stress builds on the unresolved past stress, compounding the effect of additional stress. So my big thing with empathy and boundaries is that you can either go one way or another. You can be polarized in it, like you have very rigid boundaries, so you're not able to experience other people's emotions because it's too painful, or you can't handle it, or it's not something that you're able to manage given whatever you're going through. And then there's empathy, where you're like literally living in someone else's shoes, like you're crawled down in the hole with the person and you're, you know, living that experience. So neither one of those are very helpful. And, you know, the goal would be that you are somewhere in the middle, but it's very uncomfortable to be in the middle because you feel like you're going to waver in either direction. And a lot of times people will continually push against the boundaries you have. And so you may find yourself having to be too rigid or doing too much to try to help that person in a way that's not really necessarily helpful to them and isn't going to help you in the long run. And I will say, again, I can't say enough, like stress, I think in our jobs are so ignored. Any job, like you just go to work and you expect to be stressed out. It just builds up. So I don't know for a fact, like, you know, when I became burned out. It was like a fiery and burnout. And I remember sitting and hearing a psychologist talk about, like, she did a burnout presentation, and I had my fingernails digging into my palm, trying not to cry because I was like, I'm burned out. Like, clearly I'm burned out. And as I did more research, I also had compassion fatigue. I definitely had secondary traumatic stress, right? So there's no way I couldn't have. I started out as a child protective investigator. I moved from that to doing case management, to working in CPEP, to a prison, and now, with traumatized kids. So I never recognized the warning signs. I just pushed through it. So the first time I remember having symptoms of like stress that was becoming overwhelming was as a child abuse investigator. And I was out on a call, it was 3 in the morning. I just removed 2 sets of kids, and I was on my way to what I knew was going to be the 3rd sets of kids. There was no foster placement. So I had an office full of kids just waiting on placements. And I thought to myself, if I just got in a small car accident, like, not that I wasn't ever considering doing anything, but I just like enough of a car accident so that I hit my head and I had to go in the hospital and I could turn my pager off. And like, so in hindsight, I'm like a little alarmed by that now. Like, I was 24 years old, and, obviously the job was it was a lot, and I wasn't managing it. I wasn't dealing with it. I just kept going and going and going. I did eventually stop doing that job to go to grad school because I just felt like we wasn't really able to do that long term. It's just an example of, like, I think if everybody looks back on their career and recognizes, like, there were moments that maybe you could have had a breath or asked for help or like process things that were happening, and that it was just much easier to kind of shove it aside, or maybe you were told, like, this is just part of what you have to deal with, which, it's not a recipe for longevity or feeling good about yourself in the role you have, or just in general. It's very difficult when it goes unchecked. There's a lot of different things that go hand in hand. Oh, sorry. With secondary traumatic stress. So people that have an unresolved trauma history, and that's everyone, right? Not everyone. Like, my stepdaughter has a boyfriend who doesn't have trauma, and I'm not sure what to do with him, because I feel like most people have, a lot of, they've experienced at least one trauma. If you look at the ACEs study, the Average Childhood Experiences study, like, there's a definite pattern where people who have more trauma have more difficulties, like regulating their stress responses, with substances, with physical health problems. And so when you go into a job where you have to have face-to-face contact with people who are not necessarily themselves in control of their emotions or responses, it can then lead to you also having those problems. And so, like, I think about, like, the Karens that people call these people Karen, that flip off the lid and do these crazy outlandish things that we can't imagine, like, why anyone would act that way. And then, I kind of was like, maybe my second career will be the Karen whisperer, to kind of just figure out with people, like, what is going on with you that is causing you to, like, totally lose touch with your the part of your brain that is understanding and has empathy. But that's a lot to do with trauma. So it's, when you're in a fight or flight, you're not thinking, you're feeling. And so that's sort of, nobody's listening, you're not getting much accomplished, you're not having any real growth in whatever is happening, you're both just responding as though the other person is a bear. High levels of empathy. So, I remember the first time I went to therapy, I sat in the chair and I was like, I would like to stop feeling all of the feelings of other people around me. This empath stuff is the worst. Please make it stop. And, I recognized that early enough that it was problematic. I didn't want to have to feel overwhelmed by other people's emotions. But that is a really, like, it's a risk. So if you have that and you're in a job, then it's going to be really important to recognize it, like, put your finger on it and be aware of what the limits are. Socially or organizationally isolated, inexperienced in the field, feeling professionally compromised, inadequate training, dose of exposure, type of work, caseload, overwhelm with work tasks and responsibilities. And I think if you look through this list and you're, thinking to yourself, there's got to be at least one of these things that people on this Lunch and Learn have experienced or are experiencing. And it doesn't mean that will result in secondary traumatic stress, but it does mean that you can look at it and recognize that, you know, like it's something to pay attention to. So the warning signs would be hypervigilance, poor boundaries. That goes hand in hand with the empathy, right? I'm feeling so much about this person, I just want to fix it. Or I'm, you know, taking work home, I'm doing too much, I don't know where I end and the other person begins. Avoidance, inability to empathize, numbing, which is the other polarized, too rigid of boundaries. Addictions, chronic exhaustion, or physical ailments. I like to call that general malaise. That's what sometimes the only explanation I have is that I just am experiencing some general malaise. Minimizing anger and cynicism and feelings of professional inadequacy. Like you're looking around and everybody else seems to be doing okay. So why is this bothering me or affecting me so much? And again, I think it's just because there's not a lot of room for showing weakness or emotions when you professionally. Like I think that it's seen as having bad boundaries to show or talk about how you're feeling. And that's a culture thing that my hope is with people feeling more confident and being vulnerable, that that's something that can change. Symptoms are withdrawing from friends and family, feeling unexplainable, irritable and angry or numb, inability to focus or blaming others, feeling hopeless or isolated or guilty about not doing enough. And I put this in bold because this was my big struggle, right? Like there was so much to be done and nothing was getting done. You know, it was just me. And then I would have kids that were really struggling and failing. And no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. And it was really tough for me to recognize like that was going to have to be like, that was what my enough was enough. Even though it didn't seem like it was doing anything or helping. In retrospect, I can look back and know that I was there. Like, right, I was a kid, I was there for a kid or a family when they needed someone to be there, and hopefully that will have some long-term impact. In the moment, it didn't feel like that. Like in the moment when I was really going through it, I thought like, I have not impacted anybody. Like I can't tell you one success story. But then as time went on, I started to hear from kids, and one went to college and another kid just reached out to say like, I can't tell you enough, like how great it was to know that you were like, I could go there, I could talk to you, you weren't going to judge me. And so it's small little things that you're doing that may not feel like it's big because you're looking around you and it looks like everything's crumbling. But I can't tell you enough that with patience and empathy and understanding for what someone's going through, it's enough. And you know, when it's enough just not to respond when someone's being really terrible, and to recognize that they're doing it because they're going through something. It's enough to just be there and listen. It's enough if you feel like you just need to go into work, put your head down and do paperwork, right? Like whatever you're doing, if you're doing it wholeheartedly and with a sense of purpose, it's enough. And if you're not, also, it's okay, but let's figure out what's going on that's preventing you from doing the job that you want to do or that you think you could do. Struggling to concentrate, difficulty sleeping, overeating or not eating enough, and continually and persistently worrying about work at home and even in sleep. So again, that was something that I never brought work home with me ever. Like I had an hour drive home from Elmira and I just, in that hour, would leave it there. And as I really believe like all of the experiences I've had throughout my career, just because I bottled it up and just assumed it was because of, you know, that's normal, that it just came to like a point that I couldn't bottle anymore up. Like I said, like my garbage disposal is full. I can't hear another sad story or I'm gonna vomit. And so rather than getting to that point, if you're starting to see some of these warning signs, I think it's really a benefit to you to take a pause, step back, try to find a way to put your finger on exactly what the emotion is you're in, and to move forward with asking for help, talking to your coworkers, doing something that you can figure out a way to move forward. And also if you're seeing people and your coworkers doing this, or you know, if you're a supervisor and see your workers doing this, I think the first instinct we have is to sort of not want to get involved. Like, again, that's one of the boundaries. Like I have very rigid boundaries. If I ask you what's wrong, you're going to overshare. That makes me uncomfortable. But the flip side of that is just asking someone like, are you okay? I'm here to listen. And then not feeling the pressure to fix it, but just letting them know that you're there and you see them and that you recognize it's difficult for them right now, I think that that's more powerful than most people recognize. And I know this because if anyone had seen and recognized what I was going through in that moment or those moments or that year, it would have just felt so validating, because it can feel very isolating and alone when you don't think other people are going through the same things that you are. And so that's, again, like something I can't stress enough. So these are the protective factors. You want to know what is yours. What is it that you wish you do? Separate that from what you can. So, you know, obviously I would love it if I had a magic wand and could go ahead and like make things better for everybody out there and to create homes that were full of peace and joy and understanding. But that's not mine. I can't do that. There's very limited things that I can do, and I'm really striving every day to make sure I stay within those lines. Which can be hard because, again, like when you start out in a field where you want to do stuff to help people, you look around and see that there's not much to help. And so it can feel like a pressure, like, well, if I only do what I can do, is that really helpful? But if you want to do this for long term, it kind of has to be. And you just have to figure out how to resolve that within yourself. Boundaries, your health depends on them. If you don't have boundaries in terms of where you start and where another person begins, where you end and where another person's at, it's very difficult to keep doing this. Create or find a community of trusted colleagues with whom you can share your vision, fears, hopes, and successes. I do therapy. I've just started like a private therapy practice, and I'm working with this woman who has found that she was sort of stuffing things down, like how difficult her job was, the expectations, really feeling like she couldn't handle the workload and feeling a lot of shame about that. And then like someone else in her agency spoke up and was sort of like, this is a ridiculous amount of work. And she immediately felt like the pressure leave her. And it's too bad that we have to wait for someone else to speak up so that we can feel confident speaking up for ourselves. But regardless of that, you want to find people who you think, are motivated the same way you are, doing good work the same way you are, and try to pick their heads, see are they the same place you are? Do they have any advice? Can they offer you any ideas for ways to feel better in what you're doing? Let go of the result. Acknowledge the brain's desire for control with humor and compassion. I used to call my brain an asshole, but I stopped because it gets back at me for that. So I have tried to sort of recognize that it's a well-intentioned saboteur, and that my goal is to get it to be my partner in crime. And so part of that means that, our brains don't care if we're happy, our brains care if we're safe, and trying to change or do things differently, any movement forward can feel like a risk, which again, your brain doesn't see as safe. And so a lot of the times when you start to implement changes or try to start and look at things differently or try to try new things to help yourself, you're going to find a million different reasons you're telling yourself that prevent you from really following through. And, to know that that is just, again, your very well-intentioned brain doing a very good job at sabotaging your efforts, then you can get a better handle on that. I highly recommend cognitive behavioral therapy. If you're really struggling with these things, to find a therapist who's good at that. They can help you really look at things differently and change the way you think about different things in your life or the things that you struggle with. Supervision is huge. Supervision is an essential part of any job. And again, I don't care if you're the front office person or you work at NYSEG or Verizon or, any place where you have to deal with people who may be upset or you're working with people who are struggling and suffering. Having someone who can be there to lead you in a way that is empathetic and supportive is essential. So some examples would be like, you haven't been to work or you're calling out sick a lot, you could do you're going to go on leave, I'm going to write you up, or you could be like, what's going on? It seems like you're having a hard time. Do you want to talk? What can we do to help? Taking the time that, one of the things we are taught when we do suicide assessments is to not ask when, but not to say do you or have you, but to say when was. So like, when was the last time you thought that life was really hard? When was the last time you thought about ending your life? And so when you say when, it takes the stigma off of like thinking that you're the only one. And so as a supervisor, what I would do is to say like, when was the last time you didn't want to come to work? When was the last time it was hard to get out of bed? When was the last time you left work thinking, like you didn't get anything done and you feel really bad about like, you just feel bad when you're at work and then taking it home. And so when you say when, I think it really takes the pressure off of having to, like admit that something is wrong, because it just sort of normalizes it. So the missing ingredients from enough is enough is the self-care and good boundaries. And I say this because, when we're talking about boundaries, I think that it's fake. So it's more than saying no, reflective internal values and view of self in the world. It's resistant to the idea that self-sacrifice and going above and beyond are sustainable characteristics, and often polarized between too loose and too rigid, which I've talked about. Self-sacrifice and going above and beyond are something that I think that we're taught, that it's important that you do more than you think you can do, that the people who are achievers are the ones that are recognized as being great, are the ones that go above and beyond. They stay late, they take their work home, they're always working, they're always available. And so that's, I think, something that we see is like we strive for. And I would say, again, that if you're a supervisor and you're seeing this sort of dynamic or culture, to take a step back and recognize like you're going to get more out of people if you are able to like show them the boundaries that you want, that are going to help your company, your agency, and the people that work there. My thoughts on boundaries were that I was awesome at boundaries, and this came from working in the prison where the first day, the first training was don't have sex with inmates. Pretty much I'm maybe like not saying that entirely 100% the way it was, but that's basically the message. So I thought, yes, I am awesome at this. Like my boundaries are rigid. I am never gonna, that's not my jam. I'm not gonna have sex with inmates. I did not share personal information. I never talked about anything having to do with my life. I never have given anyone my phone number or been accessible after hours. Like these were all things that I felt like I have amazing boundaries. But the reality was I had really bad boundaries. So I had great boundaries and I had bad boundaries. And my bad boundaries were that I literally felt everything everybody else was feeling. I felt like I had to fix things. And if I didn't, I was a failure. I felt as though my enough was never enough. I had pretty bad supervision. So I really didn't have a lot of guidance in those areas. But at the same time, in hindsight, I can recognize that the things that, we talked about before with what's yours to do, what's not, how can you thrive in that despite wanting to do more or seeing that more is needed? How can you feel comfort in that space between boundaries and empathy? So these are my tenets. I am not singularly responsible for another person's happiness, failure, or success. No one is. I can't change anything for a person unless they choose to make that change. I can only give them tools, be patient, understanding, and do my best to stay out of my amygdala when someone's upset in front of me so that I can listen to what they're saying and respond with compassion. Getting overly involved or attached is not only unhealthy or damaging to the people receiving services, it is also unhealthy and damaging to the person providing the services, right? So we often think about these boundaries as being really integral to the people we work with having doing well, thriving. But also, when you flip the switch, it's very important to recognize like it's not just for them, it's for us too. Because if we're taking it home, if we're not able to sleep, it's affecting our personal life, it's affecting our relationships, and it's probably impacting the job we're doing overall. There is power that comes in parts of ourselves that are kept separate from our work. What I usually say with this when I talk to teachers and other social workers is that there's power behind not telling a kid you love them, so which is really difficult. But if you think about it, we're all sort of looking for attachments and love. And if you haven't had healthy attachments or a lot of love, you're probably, the old adage is you're looking for love in all the wrong places. And so when kids would tell me they loved me, I would sort of come back with a very long talk about how I really thought that was important for them to share that with people who were in their lives in a way that was consistent and that deserved that love. And that although I really respect them and I'm there for them and I, want to make sure they feel safe and I want to give them the tools that they need to have happy, healthy lives, that for them to give me their love is, that's not that's not something that's healthy for them or for me. And I would like, joke and say, if I win the lottery, I'm out of here. And, it was, while it was hard because you see vulnerable kids reaching out for help, it was also like really empowering for them. And I've never had a kid like freak out and be mad at me or get upset. I think they all understand, like, I'm taking the time to explain to them what I want. And I also want them to not just share the love with everyone. I want them to be careful about that. And so that's my example, right? Like, I don't share my love with the people I work with, but for you, whatever role you're doing is just something that you're not going to share, a part of yourself that's just for yourself and your family and the people closest to you, that you're not going to offer up to the people that you work with or the people that you provide services to, because that's not going to be something that is good for you. And also it doesn't provide them with an opportunity to recognize that that those things can be shared in a healthy way, and not just because someone's asking for your response or emotions or asking you to show that you care about them in a way that isn't really going to fulfill them in the long run, but is just going to perpetuate sort of a negative belief about themselves or a negative idea that, that they're unworthy, or that they just may look for too much from you from that point forward. It's not up to any singular person to do work that will change the world. When I was in my 20s and I came home for parade day, I was out with one of the New York City parade bagpipers, and I was really on my my soapbox, getting very upset to hear them not on a soapbox, sort of giving the opposite of what I thought at that point everybody was. Everybody was very liberal, and I didn't have a lot of experience with different points of view. And I remember thinking, like, this is really hard, but I have to keep it up because, if Martin Luther King had given up, we wouldn't have civil rights. And then, again, as that became like way too much, and I was not convincing anybody to like think differently about things, because again, like, they're all coming from their own place and it was just me. I came to realize like it's unrealistic. It's unattainable. I'm not Martin Luther King Jr. I'm not like, crazy or that narcissistic about it, but just sort of the idea that I could be part of a movement alone. I didn't, that wasn't sustainable. And then I watched Dave Chappelle he was on David Letterman's show, and he was talking about how like this was something he really struggled with too, and then ended up recognizing like he was just going to do what he could in his small corner of the world. And so that's sort of that's something I've tried to pick up, like in my house with my family, with the person I'm in front of. Like, I'm just going to try to show them the way that I show them the understanding and the compassion that I believe is going to help them in the long run. And the most important boundary is knowing when to say no. And again, this is really difficult when we've looked before about the high achievers who are really able to succeed at their jobs or get promoted because they're always taking things home and always available and answering emails and working late. But is that really the kind of life you want to have? And is that something that you think is going to bring you long-term happiness, or just something you think you should do because that's what people do who are successful? And I would say that the people who understand how to say no are the ones that probably are more successful because they have a healthy balance between work and life. So empathy is the sticking point with boundaries, because empathy is the act of perceiving, understanding, experience, and responding to the emotional state and ideas of another person. If you're empathetic with people, it results in improved outcomes. A key component is observing or imagining another person's distress or having it evoke the same feeling in the observer. So if you're feeling all the feelings of other people around you, that's supposedly a good thing. Brene Brown has this video that I was going to show that I ended up not showing because it's very in-depth about like, what you can do to really get on the same level with someone. And while I think it is important for people in your personal lives, as we're talking about work, I don't think that it's the best description for how we should be offering empathy to the people that we work with or the people that are receiving services from us, because again, it's giving yourself a part of yourself that is not necessarily in anyone's best interest, because we're not there long-term in their lives. We're maybe giving them something that they aren't able to get anyplace else and don't know how to get for themselves. And the idea that we have to be more than we are. And so what's the balance And that's this idea that you can empathize without internalizing. And this woman, Kate Kenfield, made this thing. It was tea and empathy, and I have them, and they're great. And it's just a way to like really figure out how you're feeling and sharing it with people and understanding where it's coming from. Because I think a lot of times we're just sort of like flying by the seat of our pants and not really entirely sure how we're feeling or how we're portraying feelings or what we're feeling from other people. And so the idea is to really to focus on what you're feeling, where it's coming from, rather than having to like get knee deep in it with the other person. I think about it sometimes as having a bubble around me, so I can see everything, and I'm curious, like I want to know what's going on. I want to hear what you're feeling, but those feelings can't get through the bubble. Or looking above it, like sort of I'm on a balcony and I'm looking down and I'm seeing all the things going around the person. I'm listening to the person. I can see and I can understand what's happening. But again, I'm not receiving those feelings, because if I am receiving those feelings and it's anger, then I'm going to respond in a way that I feel threatened, right? And so there's a flip from this. Like you can be empathetic and be understanding of someone who's sad and feel sadness or, you know, shame, but also anger, and all of those things are going to result in a way of responding that's not necessarily beneficial to you, or again, the people that are, you know, you're feeling their feels. So empathetic contagion is becoming overwhelmed by feelings that aren't yours. Empathetic concern is taking in or experiencing someone's feelings as not required. The focus is on engaging with curiosity about what someone else is feeling to seek an understanding of their experience. So we're moving on now to the part of the presentation that is really focusing on what can you do? Like, so what is it that you can do to help yourself get through all these things? Because it's enough to say like, have good boundaries, know when to say when about empathy, let's look for the middle ground, but also like what stops us from doing that? Because I think everybody can recognize, like you go in with good intentions, you go to these trainings, you're like, okay, yes, I can do this. And then you just sort of like end up falling back into things that you are used to or what feels comfortable, or, you know, just in general, what your pattern is with work and how you interact with people. So I like this because we avoid feelings, right? I don't want to feel anger, embarrassment, confusion, frustration, disappointment, worry, or sadness, especially when I'm working. So I'm going to do everything I can to avoid those feelings. But in the end, again, it's sort of like that garbage disposal. It's going to come in, right? So if you're stuffing it down, eventually it's going to come up. And so the idea is, what are we doing? Are we confusing self-care? Are we thinking we're doing self-care, or are we really self-sabotaging? And so the self-care is the practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, particularly during periods of stress. Self-sabotaging is the sabotaging, whether consciously or subconsciously, of oneself. So what I mean by that is sort of this idea that in order to be happy, I have a glass of wine. In order to be happy, I have to buy things. In order to be happy, I have to smoke some pot, whatever. I have to do something else that makes me happy. And that's not looking inside or doing stuff that's necessarily healthy. It can be very counterproductive to what our long-term goals are. And the result of that is that, you know, we're very overweight, we're in debt, we have a lot of substance abuse, alcohol dependence. And then my funny thing at the end is that, you know, women aged 30 to 50 spent 5 million hours pinning things they will never revisit. And I say this because I don't know how many times I put running shoes on in order to go, like I get up, put my running shoes on, I'm going to go downstairs, I want to run. And then somehow between putting my sneakers on, I sit down and end up on Pinterest and find I now no longer have time to run. And that's just an example of, like, you may be very well intentioned and then get sidetracked easily thinking like, well, I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes on Pinterest because I deserve it, because I have a hard job and it's really nice to look at things. But then, you know, if I showed you the boards I have, I don't know how, maybe a couple that I've gone back to and actually done something on. So it's just a really effective way that I sabotage the efforts to move forward and to do things that I know is healthy, but maybe hard. So assessing your self-care, and I took this from Transforming the Pain, a workbook on vicarious traumatization, and we're going to try to be a little interactive with this. So, you know, the idea is self-care is more than just doing things for yourself. It's protecting yourself. It's trying to think about things differently, and it's also having a plan. So the warning signs is increased anxiety, concern about safety, intrusive negative thoughts and images related to other people's traumatic experiences, difficulty maintaining work-life boundaries, avoiding people, places, and activities that you used to find enjoyable, feeling emotionally numb, disconnected, or unable to empathize, experience feelings of chronic exhaustion related to some physical ailments, regularly feeling angry and or cynical about your employer and or coworkers, feeling inadequate in your work, and questioning whether what you do matters. So if you can just look at these, sort of take a note to yourself, sort of see which ones of these do you think that that you have struggled with or that you are currently struggled with. And, you know, just take a minute and think about what effect it has on you. And if you can go back and think about the things we talked about, do you recognize any of the, you know, the difficulties that a lot of people would experience that lead up to these things? So now we're going to go into the actual self-care. So we're going to put a poll up because I would like it if you can see which one of these that you do. You can pick as many as you want, and to see, you know, are these things that are something you already have implemented in your life? So I say that I try to eat healthy, I try to exercise, I try to get medical care when I need, I try to take time off, I like to have some sex, and I do my best to get enough sleep, but I'm not going to click because I don't actually do a lot. So Melissa, I'm just assuming I can go forward. Okay, great. So it looks like eat regularly, exercise, get medical care. That's great. So the next one is emotional self-care. And again, we're going to put up the poll. Spend time with others who company you enjoy. You just go ahead and look through all these, see which ones you do. I like to spend time with people and definitely stay in good contact with important people. I give myself lots of affirmation. I write myself love letters. I write letters to myself when I felt bad or insecure or was in pain. I mean, that is like something I really believe in. I don't like to review things. I would get a little carried away if I got too much more. I do allow myself to get angry, freak out. I feel okay with feeling okay. I love to laugh, and I have great dogs that aren't so horrible, but I play with them a lot. Oh, so people play with children, dogs, cats, etc. a lot. That's awesome. Spiritual self-care. This may be something I think often like spiritual is confused with religion, but I don't think that that's necessarily true. It can be anything where you give yourself up to an idea that you're not, you know, the end all be all, or that there may be something else out there that's guiding you. So just be clear about that. I think that just to try at times not to be in charge of the expert. There's a really funny like twist on the prayer that don't give me more than I can accept, or you know, and it's sort of the flip of it would be the remind me I'm not the smartest person in the room, allow me to listen and not always have to talk or act. So I think that's something I really strive for. So be open to not knowing and be open to reflection. That's great. Workplace or professional self-care? I like to do this. I don't check my email. I have made a very nice workspace. I now get really good supervision and consultation. I have a really good peer support, and I have a ton of non-trauma area interests. So I don't read about trauma before I go to bed anymore, which has been really healthy and helpful. I've taken up sewing. I learning like how to do computer stuff. So I've really tried to take a break from always breathing, eating, thinking about trauma, thinking that I had to like be, know enough that I could make a difference and change people's perspectives. I just sort of, again, do what I can do. That's good. Take a break. People do that. Take time to chat with coworkers. That's great. So what I'd like if people feel comfortable is to, in the chat, maybe say some areas that you already have done that you noticed on there or would like to do, or something you feel like you hadn't thought of before and you're committed to doing. You don't have to add it in the chat, but I feel like it's, at least you're saying it out loud or you're recognizing it, and that can be pretty beneficial. Meditate more, yes. Something I preach, but I need to start practicing. All right. So I'm wondering what this process of filling this out was like for you. What the areas are that you're strongest or weakest, and does it feel out of touch with your job role and expectations? So some of these things I look at and I'm sort of like, when I go back to the workplace one, there's not always a time or a place where you can do all those things. Like if you're working in the field, you may not have enough time, or there's so much we have to get done in our workday. It's not always feasible to take that time out. And is that a way you can advocate for yourself? Also, I have a hard time with the idea of having to pay money to do something for self-care. So getting massages, doing a workout class, like things like that, I understand are great and like super healthy, but also like not everybody has enough money to do that or is able to spend like those resources, or time can be really something that's out of, if you have kids or you have, a job where you have to work overtime or anything that like, time, I think your time is so important. And if you're feeling stressed for time, that it can feel very much like you're, not able to achieve the piece that we're looking for with this. Anything missing from this list? It's a self-care must. Again, I'd love it if you shared it. And think about the feelings you have when people talk about self-care. Do you recognize, like, are you doing more self-care or self-sabotage? And just to recognize it, that maybe you can move forward from it. So this is simple steps to shift perspective. And this is the mindfulness, right? So Dan Harris wrote the book 10% Happier. I highly recommend it. The voice in my head, the running commentary that had dominated my field of consciousness since I could remember, is kind of an asshole, right? And I, again, encourage you not to call your brain an asshole, because it will get back at you. So just think about it as a well-intentioned saboteur that you're trying to work with to become your partner in crime. Change your picture, your brain is drawing, recognize the connection between your thoughts, feelings, and action. This is a huge component of cognitive behavioral therapy. So you have a negative thought, your brain senses danger, and a fight, flight, freeze response initiated. So it can be someone who's yelling at you or being rude to you, or something that's happening that's out of your control, watching someone else get treated badly. And then you really, you're responding in ways that in hindsight, maybe you recognize were disproportionate to what was happening, or you felt out of control or embarrassed about your responses or reactions. And to have patience with yourself and recognize, like, everybody has this, and once you know it, you can do something about it. Mindful breathing is allowing you to respond versus react. So what you want to do is get from your feeling brain to your thinking brain. This is a huge thing. So if you're able to breathe in, count to 3, hold it, breathe out as high, however you want to do it, you really want to be able to be present and to focus on what you can do to get out of your feelings. Your body is okay in this moment. You have some friends you can count on. You have a job. You haven't murdered anyone yet. That's what I tell myself, because I'm too pretty for prison. So I can't murder. I have to do these things. So close the eyes, deep breathly. Imagine the details of your favorite place, all the details, like what it feels like to drive there, what it feels like when you first walk in, how does it smell? What do you see? Who's there? All of these things that really can help you get back to the present, because again, in order to access these memories, you have to access the part of your brain that's not in control when you're in fight, flight, or freeze, and that's the goal. So all of these things, sitting behind a waterfall, imagine that. Take a tour of an old familiar place that has good memories attached in your brain. If you can't dance it out, write it out, because maybe dancing at work isn't really always appropriate. Be specific what exactly you're grateful for versus generalization. So, you know, like I'm grateful I have people in my life would be, I'm really grateful that I have my parents, they're still alive, they're healthy. I'm, you know, really grateful that I have, you know, a car, I can get to work. I don't have to worry about transportation. Go in depth over breadth. So write in detail about the gratitude you have for one person or thing. Try to write a list every day. It can be tedious and lead to avoidance. So you want to do this maybe once or twice a week, 3 times maybe, where you're able to really just like take a minute, pause, and recognize all the good stuff you have. Try subtraction. What would life be like without your people, places, and things? Try to write a positive with every negative. Think of a time when anticipation, anxiety was worse than what happened. Like how many minutes do you spend worrying about things that never ended up either happening or were not as bad as you thought? And remember, you've gotten through lots of hard things. You'll get through hard things again. Try not to take for granted the gifts and good stuff in your life. See good things as gifts. These are my dogs. They drive me crazy, but I try to remember, like, most of the time I love them. Most of the time they're great. It's just, you know, it can be overwhelming sometimes with 2 big dogs, and I can feel like, you know, it's too much, but I try to remember the good stuff. Pay attention, linger on the feeling you have, the focusing on the good. Remember when you wake up from a bad, or last night I had a dream that I came to this a half an hour late, and I woke up and I was like, oh, thank God that didn't happen. And I really wanted to like focus on like how good it feels. Like when you wake up from a bad dream and you realize that it was just a dream and it didn't really happen. And then tell yourself that just because your brain thinks it does not make it true. So just because your brain is thinking that someone may be like judging you or you're not doing enough or that there's something else you could be doing or thinking, it's not true all the time. It's just another way that's looking to keep you safe. And again, those thoughts are not necessarily congruent with being happy. Compassion, not relentless positivity. All emotions are good. I know I did talk to you about getting out of your feelings and into your thoughts, but that's mostly when you sense that you're responding in a way that's not helpful to yourself or to the people you work for with. And I think that it's, you know, my thing is the proverbial shit will always hit the fan. It's better to have an umbrella on hand than get covered from head to toe. And so these things are the umbrella, and the idea that, you know, like, even though it's bad, you're going to get through it. And that, you know, it doesn't mean that you have to be constantly like, everything is great, I'm super grateful, like nothing is wrong, because you're not like acknowledging the fact that a healthy person has all the, like, you know, a healthy psychological assessment has a broad range of emotions. And this is how to feel your feelings. Things that sound obvious. Unpleasant feelings arise. Your mind launches into whatever inner story accompanies this feeling. I'm unlovable. I'm a loser. I resent my face. Stop. You're thinking your feelings. Redirect your mind away from these thoughts and into the sensations in your body. Mentally name them. My chest is tight. Breathe into the feeling sensation and allow a cry, shake, etc. Not in Target or at work, probably, ideally. And your mind will really want to go back into this thought story mode. When this happens, redirect your awareness back into your body. Take deep breaths, keep feeling into your body, let the feeling exist, and trust it will leave. Observe it changing, watch it move, and notice that you have survived. So what went right today is my end. This is what I do every night before I go to bed. It's the one thing that has really, like, you know, when everything else fails and I do this, I feel like I've won the lottery. Well, not really, but sort of. So I think to myself, instead of at night, I think a lot of people tend to go over like all the things they didn't do or they didn't get done, and they just, you know, feel like a loser because they had this list that they didn't get done. I think about every single thing I did that day that I didn't want to do, or that I didn't give in to, like, you know, a self-sabotage trigger. So, you know, for this, it was I didn't eat all the Whoppers and I didn't eat all of the Sour Patch Kids, right? So like that to me was like, that's what went right that day. And sometimes it's I got up and walked the dogs, and that was the only thing I did, but at least I got up and walked the dogs. And so I think when you do that, you can see like there's so much more that you've done during the day than you even recognize, because you're paying attention to the stuff you didn't get done. And again, that's that idea of enough is enough, like your enough is enough. So that is it.